Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is the second scene in this series of media and mood. This scene right here is the same composition as the previous video, but it takes on a little bit of a different spirit, you know, just with the way that I utilized the same media, which is the dye-based inks on glossy cardstock, but I used different colors and in different saturations of it. This one here I used more of my medium and darker blue, and I used a little bit of the pink tone to add in that kind of more twilight-ish type of look with the pink violet clouds. But this one here is going for kind of more of a high noon type of scene where you can actually kind of decipher some variations in the foliage, you know, in terms of being able to see some greens, more of a kind of a crystalline blue water surface, and going for a little bit of variation in my foreground reeds. Quick and easy scene like this as far as the coloring process, and that I really didn't utilize a whole lot of tone within the scene. I think it was just the Memento summer sky as far as my blue tones. Oh, and I used some of my Manganese Blue from my Marvy pen here, so, you know, just to give it a little bit of a brighter tone, but very light hues in terms of you know, the sponging application of color to kind of color the scene in terms of, in this case, it's water and sky. Okay, and just a little touch of some green in here makes it really easy. This will be a good one to do for a stamp along. You can choose to stamp along with me. This scene right here took about, I don't know, probably takes about 20 minutes or so, or something like that. Most of the work is done just coloring your stamp, you know, to get a little bit of a variation happening in the actual impressions, okay? And that's a fun way to work. I don't do that too often, but I do like the results of the varied impressions when I do it, you know, getting some of that brown in the branch and some of that green and darker greens. I don't know, it adds to a little bit of richness inherently in the prints themselves, as opposed to bringing in all of the color afterwards in the toning process. So, I don't know, high noon, and what we call kind of local color, you know, tree branches are green, trunks are brown, you know, rocks are gray, kind of that notion, sky blue, water blue type of thing. So it gives it kind of a light, airy feel to, you know, a given composition, kind of working in that type of color scheme and kind of that limited value range in terms of what you add into the sky. So kind of light and airy, and maybe kind of, I don't know what another adjective would be, kind of friendly, maybe, inviting. I don't know, probably less mysterious than something kind of the darker range of tones and finish. Okay, anyways, hope you enjoy it, and if you choose to stamp along, hope you enjoy the process. Okay, this is number 2 in this series of different moods of a given composition, okay? I just inked up my Lakeside Cove Lg stamp in black ink, and what I'm doing is I'm going into my trees here with a dark green, okay? Now, is that black polluting some of my pen? Yeah, maybe, but what I do is I just kind of wipe it off like that and all's well. Now, I colored up the entire stamp with black, hitting some of my reflections down here, green, too, if the trees are going to be green, okay? And I colored in everything black as opposed to just coloring my trees green, my rocks gray or something like that, water blue, reflections green, okay? Because when you do that, if you don't have some sort of universal tone, it could be a dark brown or something like that too, that would be good. Things don't seem to be quite as integrated and related. Everything looks very separate, you know. So I do like to get kind of a universal base tone down, okay? Now I put in some greens up here, and I'm going to put in a little bit of brown for my tree trunks. Yeah, I'm not hitting them exactly, it's just kind of giving it a little bit of a brown tone, I think. It might, sometimes, you know, you don't get as much color because of that base tone black, and everything looks black, but hopefully I get a little bit of variation. So when I'm going in here, I'm kind of removing some of the ink, so I'm kind of rolling my brush marker a little bit. Now these brush markers are dye-based inks, by the way, and these are the Marvy brush markers. They're very thick and wide-tipped. It's the 1500 series of markers. Okay, now I'm going in and blending in that brown a little bit. I don't just go with one color. I kind of add a little bit of color, I go in with another color, and then I kind of blend that color back out again. Okay. All right, now in that water, let me see if I have a pen. Okay, now one of the things that I didn't do is I didn't color in a lot of the this reflection area down here, this water surface, but I'll go and I'll put a little bit down. This is a very light blue, and it is kind of mixing with a lot of the black there, giving me kind of a steel bluish looking. I'll go through some of the reflections down here just to get a little bit of color down here. Maybe I'll put a little bit in my rocks as well, just to give it kind of a, hopefully, maybe a kind of a steel blue grayish tone, okay? In other words, you know, this doesn't have to be perfect. There's going to be some variation, certainly. And that is something that I like, okay? I like to have things kind of very integrated and blended, where one color doesn't have to be very, you know, separated from another color, okay? So, you know, we'll have greens and blues and blacks and browns and greens and blues and blacks and everything like that, okay? So everything's a little bit varied, and you see that out in nature, okay? Things reflect off of each other and so on and so forth. All right, so that is, you can see a little bit of variation. It's very dark, so we don't see any true green or anything like that, but see this area down here where it's a little bit kind of a different hue? That would look quite different if it wasn't, if it was all stamped in black. You can see a little bit of variation down here as well. Okay. I would have preferred a little bit more green showing, but, you know, I don't know, it's all right. So here's kind of the difference here. I don't know if you can tell on camera. You know, I mean, this one has all those other tones in it. This is from my previous video. Okay, you can see a little green hint down there. All right, now maybe there'll be a little bit more in this image. I'll stamp out my Pines and Rocks image here. Okay. That is just all black dye-based ink. Now let's go in with the green again. Okay. Well, maybe I'll hit a little bit of the brown first. These trunks are a little bit larger because this image represents kind of trees that are closer to us. All right. Hit it with the green. I did a streak of brown up those trunks like that. Now what I'll do is I'll go across it, you know, like this, and hit some of those branches and, you know, that more foliated section. The tree, okay. Put a little down in that water. Maybe there's some reflections of the tree in the water. And then I'll hit this with some blue tones. Okay. These are very old brush markers here. They last forever. These are kind of the newer ones, you know, that have this black barrel. Okay. When I say newer, those newer ones might be 15 years old. Not quite sure. Okay. The older ones, they're, I don't know, these are probably 25 years old or something like that. I might have reinvigorated them a little bit. You just kind of, if they dry out on your shelf, you just kind of open the back of this cap right here, and there's a reservoir in there for the ink, and that has dried. Since it's a dye-based ink, all you need to do is to add some water to that reservoir. Don't put a lot of it in there. And that dried dye will go back into solution, and you'll have a pen that's ready to go again. All right, nice even pressure all over the entire stamp. Don't rock it or something like that, otherwise you're going to be getting, you know, the side of, you know, your rubber kind of imprinting. So nice flat pressure, but pressure in the middle and all over the stamp. These stamps have a lot of surface area, okay? It's not an outline of a tree or something like that that has very little surface area, so high density images with a lot of detail in them are going to have a lot of surface area, so you want to make sure that you get a nice even impression. Okay, a little bit more green in that one this time, okay? Do you see that? There's a different impression right there. Okay. Now, let's go with, I tell you what, I'm going to be adding in a little bit of tone to this. I plan on using this tree in here, and we'll also apply some colors to that, and we'll have some reeds in here. Maybe we'll go with a little bit of color, I'm not quite sure on this one. I might just go with black to have it kind of stand out a little bit more prominently in the foreground. The dark you go with something, usually it represents something a little bit closer to you. Okay, water, all right? Now, just like in this scene here, I used various, it's not focusing, here we go, various values of blue for my water ripples, okay? We'll go with something like this, light, medium, dark. Okay, these are dye-based inks as well. Focus, here we go. There we go. Okay, Mementos. Could be any dye-based inks, mix and match, you know, feel free to do that. Okay, let me see. Light tones, okay. That gives us a little bit of that light water ripple texture, okay. Ah, my camera's not focusing in as fast as it used to, I don't think. Okay. Now, when I go with this darker blue, I'm not going to cover this whole thing. I'm going to leave this area a little bit lighter in here, okay? So this is what you do with your medium tone, okay? Coming in here like this. I will use my, you know, second or third, I don't know, whatever, imprint off that one inking, okay? But you see this? This is lighter in here and darker down here. And then let's, maybe I won't go quite as dark on this scene right here as I did on this one, the first one. But let's go with a little bit of this perimeter darker blue, the Danube blue. Go with a navy blue, you know, or a kind of equivalent, but you see this right here. That texture in itself kind of creates this whole kind of a lighting scheme. Okay, it's darker down here and lighter in the middle. And this is going to, lighter area is going to draw our eye into the scene. Okay? But now what we do to kind of make sense of this ripple right here is we'll add some color to it, okay? Let's get some room here. Sometimes I get tired of doing the same composition, so I don't do the same thing twice, you know, but I don't know, I was thinking about this series of lessons that I'm doing now. I thought, you know, this could really be fun. I don't even have to, you know, think about compositions, you know, for the next few videos. I just do the same composition. I can just concentrate on one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and that's kind of creating mood, you know, within a scene. And that's where the colors come into play, you know, and how you use colors, okay? Now, I'm using a color box stylus tool. You can use a cosmetic sponge. You can use those stipple brushes and whatnot to apply your inks. And again, this is the glossy cardstock that I'm working in. This type of look for this scene can certainly be done on, you know, a matte cardstock, okay? I'm not going to apply tons of ink on here like I do on some scenes, you know, where I really saturate the paper with a lot of layers of ink. This one is going to be a little bit more minimal and kind of have a lighter feel to it, okay? lighter in terms of kind of the emotional quality, but also in terms of physically lighter in terms of values. Okay, I'm just going to, this will be like a high noon scene or something like that, okay, as opposed to like a twilight or something. All right, so a little bit more kind of airy. All right, now I'm just going on with my lightest blue. I start light and I will work darker. I'm kind of hitting this area along my shoreline a little bit darker because that area, you know, is right next to my trees, so it would just make sense that this area right here would be in a bit of shadow. Okay. See that? I'm kind of putting it right down there. I am getting some into my rocks. That's not a big deal. You don't have to stay within the lines of, you know, when it comes to scenic stamping. It's, you know, it's, I don't know if it's pure freedom. It's certainly freedom for certain types of applications and processes, though. When we get some of this blue up into those rocks, it actually helps the scene, you know, in terms of cohesiveness. All right, let's get some of this tone up into our sky as well, okay? See this little area that I'm leaving light? I'm just leaving the white of the paper. Well, it has some of that tone on it from the water pattern small stamp. Okay, now I'm picking up a little bit of this black ink from that tree stamping up here, so no big deal. I'm getting some fingerprints too. This isn't wet to the touch, you know, it's fairly dry, but there are some little beads probably of some ink that aren't dry yet, you know, and if I would have waited 5 minutes to let it set up a little bit more, it wouldn't have been any big deal, you know. But I did have quite a bit of ink when I made my impressions because of those pens, you know, those pens are fairly juicy and they lay down a lot of ink on those stamps, but I'm not going to worry about that. All right, adding some tone down. It's going to be a blue sky in my scene. I think I want it a little bit brighter. Mementos are really nice inks, but they tend to be fairly, in terms of intensity, they're rather dull. Not in terms of interest, you know, I like a dull ink, but I might want to add some brighter. So this is a manganese blue. It's just a little bit of a brighter blue. It's the number 36. I really love this one from Marvy. Let's add a little bit more down to our water with that. Okay, I'll add some to my sky as well. That pen laid down a lot of ink, so I'm smearing my trees a touch. Okay. If you're using like brushes, you know, and going like this, it won't kind of smear as much, but since I'm kind of wiping across, there it is, smearing a touch, okay? All right, so anyways, we're getting this little kind of reiteration of lighting down here. This is what one of the things, videos that I did quite a while ago was easy lighting. One of the things I like to do is I like to have a little bit of area of my sky lit and an area down here in my water lit, or land, okay? So what you have is kind of darker perimeters all the way around, and an area up here that's light, and then I have a kind of a darker center area, and then it's light down here again. So light, dark, light. It's almost like a little 8, okay? With that little area coming in there. It's a little bit darker. Let's try some gray, okay? And maybe I'll go with the Memento London Fog Gray. I was going to use my Marvy one. If I decide to use my Marvy, I'll do that. Memento is fairly light in value. And let's hit our rocks with some of that gray. Let's just go for a little bit of a change of hue. Okay. You can apply this with like Q-tips or something like that if you want to. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'll leave a little bit of a lightness in my rocks, just so it looks like they're catching some of that light. Which ones you leave light? doesn't really matter, just as long as you leave some a little bit lighter than others. You know, you can kind of go halfway. I can turn my stylus tool like this and add a little bit of tone on the base of the rocks and not on the top, you know, like that. If I kind of angle it like that and using a little edge, just take it nice and slow, you know, and you'll have a lot of control over your color application. Alright, those rocks look pretty good to me, I guess, in that tone. Alright, let's see here. I tell you what, let's have some fun here. Not that the rest of it isn't fun, but let's go for a little bit of variation, okay? Let's go with, here's a distressing peeled paint. It's kind of a earthy green tone. Let's zoom in here a little bit. Okay, let's take a look here. Take a look at what it looks like. Kind of an olive, mossy green to me. Okay, let's put a little bit of moss on some of these rocks. Okay, I'm going with a very light touch, just barely dabbing it down. And as I add it in here, it gets a little bit darker with each stroke, but one stroke, it's almost invisible, and I like that control. I like to be able to see things come into focus very slowly, okay? I'll show you what it looks like here. You can see it on this side with a little bit of moss, and over here I don't have any. Okay, so it's a little bit of a change in hue for a little bit of variation, okay? And I don't have to worry about getting it on some of my trees, or if I get some in the water, hey, you know, water is reflective, right? So you get some of the objects that are above the water, next to the water's edge, reflecting in the water, okay? So it's just something like that, right? It's a little bit more rich, I would say, because we're kind of extending the range of hue within a given object. So instead of it just being gray, now we've added a bit of warmth, I guess, in terms of color temperature. All right, now let's look at some additional objects here. Let's look at our oak branch. Here it is just in black on this scene, hanging in from above. Let's do that with this one. Let's hit this, let's go fairly dark with our black again. I'm not going to use the whole stamp. I'm going to color it more than I think I'll need, though, because I don't want to say, okay, I'm going to use this branch right here, and I only color that part, and I use more of it, and suddenly, you know, there's this blank area up there. So color more than you think you'll need. This branch right here, I just colored it all black. I'm going to hit this area, these branches here, with a little bit of this brown, and hopefully some of that brown shows up in terms of a variation in hue. We'll see. Sometimes it just stems out just straight black. It just depends. If the black that you're using is really, really juicy, and let's say the brown that you're using is a little bit dry, what you're doing is you're not really applying too much of that brown. If the brown is juicier than the black, then you know, you'll get more of that brown on there. So it just depends on kind of how, you know, the relative, I don't know, you know, how much moisture content there is with any given pen against what you've already kind of applied to the stamp, if that makes any sense. You know, you might be absorbing some of that ink that you've already kind of laid down. If, you know, if the pen is, you know, drier than the pad ink or whatever. Okay, so I'm going in, kind of adding some of this green into the foliage. Let's use a little bit of this olive green in here, too, for a little bit of variation. We'll see if we do get some variation. You never know. Sometimes I do all this work and I stamp it out and it's like all black. You know, with very, very little discernible tonal change. Okay, we'll come in over here. What this does is it kind of, having that foreground kind of puts you into the scene a little bit more. Having something very close to the viewer's eye puts you a little bit more into the scene. It kind of integrates the viewer into the scene. Okay, now I'm holding this down a little bit longer because this surface is a little bit damp. Okay, there it is, right there. You see that kind of variation? There's a little bit of brown in there. And some of that green, right? Kind of. I see a little touch of that lighter green. All right, now I'm going for a second impression over here. Unfortunately, you really can't go for a second impression because that was really, a lot of the ink came off on that side, and if I tried to go for it again over here, you know, everything that I stamped at there would be very light. So, I'll just take a few moments and color it up again. Okay. It's very easy to do. Green. Things don't have to be perfect. This is one of those other things about this type of stamping. You don't have to be right on the money as far as where you know, color something, as you can see. I'm not trying to stay within a given line. You know, it isn't some kind of object where, let's say it's a figurine, the pants are blue and the top is red, you know, and the belt is brown or something like that. You don't have to do that, you know. There's kind of blends happening all over in kind of nature and, you know, varied reflective qualities of light on objects, so it gives you kind of really a freedom in terms of your kind of color and ink applications, both on objects and in areas of your scene. So is it harder to do than coloring real specifics? Well, it's if you're real kind of used to coloring very specific areas and you have to have designated areas, you know, you're going to be more used to that. But if you do one scene in kind of this manner, people get in the flow of it very quickly. I used to see it all the time in my workshops or whatever. They'd say, oh, well, you can do that? You know, that type of thing. And you see this kind of this relief and this kind of this notion being lifted after a few minutes of working on a scene. It's like, oh my gosh, you can just color all over the place, or I don't know, kind of that notion. Okay, so there's another branch right there coming into it. It has a little bit of a different feel, right, than this one. Both are on glossy cardstock. Now let's hit this area down here. Well, let's do something. I'll show you what you can do too on that. Let's go with, just, I don't know, this is like a green. It's a very neutral green. It's like a, I don't know, Christmas green, something like that. Let's do this right here for a little bit of variation. Let's do this in green, okay? It has to be kind of as dark as the background or darker. Okay, let's hit that in green. Let's say it's kind of springtime at this spring at the lake, and we have some green reeds. I don't do that very often. That actually looks pretty good. Okay, but I'm not only going to stamp it in green. Okay, what I'll do is I'll create a little bit of depth in the foreground. So I'm going with the dark green. Now let's go with black. Okay, now don't try to, you know, go with the stamp positioner and hit, you know, exactly where you laid down, you know, that image. We want to vary it a little bit, so I'm going to skew this so we have both black reeds and green. Okay, so it's a little bit darker and lighter in the foreground, so we're creating kind of this notion of depth right in the foreground itself in that image. Okay, so you have darker ones and you have lighter ones, so it creates a little bit of depth. The lighter ones, which are the dark green, look farther back, right? But it's all kind of within the same cluster, you know. I'm talking about, you know, a few inches farther back, okay? But it creates a little bit of variation right there, as opposed to having it kind of monotone, monochromatic. In this one right here, you can see it all in black. In this one, it could stand, I don't know if I could use the green in this one because the background is very much darker, so. But as long as that green is as dark or darker than what I've already laid down here, it creates that little bit of depth within the scene right here. A lot of people like this look type of scene, you know, and it's more kind of what they would be familiar with in terms of being at a location, you know, during the daytime or something like that, okay? But that is the scene. This one is, I'm really itching to add in some little special effects, and I plan on doing that when I'm done with this series, you know. As far as the inking, I'll go in here and I'll add some additional embellishments to really kind of bring these areas to life. But let's take a look right here and take a look at some of the closer areas. Do you see this area down here where there's that water? But you can see where that varied kind of tonal value scale works in here. We have light blue in the lighter areas. As it moves out in here, it gets a little bit of a medium blue where I've added in some of that tone. Okay, that shows up down here. And then where it gets a little bit more saturated with ink down here. I mean, talking about saturation, there's not very much ink used in this scene, so. But you can see my darker blue down in here, so it's darker and lighter, and there's dark water ripples, medium water ripples, light water ripples. So you can really use those textures to your advantage just by utilizing your color scheme from your scene instead of just doing them all monotone, okay? And it looks a little bit more shimmery that way, you know, in my opinion. Just a little bit of tone in the sky, okay? Now I could have stamped out all these, you know, foreground imagery, like the branch and these reeds down here right in the beginning, and then added in my color, you know, right over the top of it. But you saw how this kind of, see how it's a little bit blurred in there? I would have had to wait for this to dry, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just do a quick and easy scene. And, you know, I mean, with, you know, doing videos like this, I could have paused the video and come back to it, but I don't know. When I'm doing these videos, I kind of like to work in real time, and that's the way most of us do it at home, so that's the way I like to do it in the video as well. So I just wait till the end to just stamp those out, you know, right at the end, and I don't have to worry about it smearing, and I can see, I don't know if you can see it, but there's areas on this branch that are still a little bit wet, okay? And it won't take real long to dry, but maybe a half hour or something like that. But anyways, little variations in hue. See a little bit of green in there. You don't want to go with something like, you know, this green, I don't think, you know, like a hot neon green or something like that. But, you know, if you don't have something like kind of a dull green or something like that, and all you have is something like this, all you need to do is you just kind of ink up your applicator, whatever it is, and just blot it off a few times, okay? So that you're using a very pale version of it, and then take it in here, okay? So, in theory, when you use inks this way, in this manner, in theory, you can take any one of your inks, no matter how dark, and use any variations of it from its full intensity all the way to white, just by the amount of ink that you remove from whatever application process you're using, or applicator. So you just kind of blot it off a few times, and then suddenly, instead of using a black, maybe you're using a 10% gray or something like that. Maybe instead of a dark green, you know, you're using, you know, a very pale 5% green or something like that if you wanted to do that. So, utilize that and take full advantage of your color range of inks that you're using. Okay, so that's the second scene. I don't know, like I said, probably kind of a high noon type of scene. Something like that, you know, during the daytime. Certainly different looking than this. Same composition, same medium, but just utilizing the inks in a different manner for a different look on the lake. Okay. All right, so second scene down. Looking forward to doing a lot more and coming up with some different effects for this given composition.